Hello everyone. This is the story of a victim who lost a large amount of money to a scammer. The story has been covered by other scam baiters as well, and I'll leave links to their videos in the description box below. The scam didn't start in the usual way. It started when she was contacted by someone who told her that she was the daughter of an old friend of the victim, an old friend that the victim hadn't had any contact with for several years. English isn't my viewer's first language, and so for this video she chose to write her story rather than doing a recorded interview. This is what my viewer told me. I received a call from a 16-year-old girl telling me that she was the daughter of a friend that I haven't seen for years. I don't remember her last name, but she said that it was her daughter and that she had a brother named Roy and that they were looking for his father, who was in Iraq and was a Navy commander, was very worried because since his mother died in a car accident, they were alone, and since I have a very small family, I believed him. But how did the scammer know who my viewer's friends were? I think, continued my victim, it all started when my cell phone was hacked over a year ago and I got a list of my contacts. That's when I started receiving emails that I didn't even understand. But this one, about the girl Annie, caught my attention and I accepted it. It was the biggest mistake I have ever made. However, the sweetness of her texts broke my heart and made me help her communicate with her father. The victim then shared some of those emails from the fake daughter. Good afternoon, Mum. I'm not actually okay. I've been trying to reach out with my dad for a few days now, but I couldn't get in touch with him. I'm worried something bad has happened to him, Mum. If there's any way you're getting in touch with him, please tell him that we really need him home. We have nothing left right now. Please, we really need you to talk to him. I hope he's all right. Thanks, Mum. I'll be waiting to hear from you soon. Bye. And notice the use of emotional blackmail there. Something that the fake children of scammers will always do when you're told that the child is going to contact you. They will always call you Mum or Dad. Please, Mum, the fake daughter said in another email, if you're having any contact with my dad, please help me tell him to send me and Roy some funds. We're out of funds right now, Mum. Please help me talk to my dad. Please help me talk to my dad. Things are not actually going well with us right now. Sometimes I think he wanted to abandon us. Please help talk to him, Mum. We have nothing left with us. As you can probably see, preparing the victim for the first request for money. My viewer continued her story. After several weeks, I contacted him, and he tells me that he was barely able to communicate, and that he was very worried about his children, and that he didn't mind me contacting him because that way he would feel calmer until the day he returned from Iraq. I did it because I was flattered, since I didn't have daughters, and I liked the idea of sharing cooking recipes, or some of those things that girls like to do. The father was happy that we got along so well, and we started talking almost daily. If he was in his office, it would be easier to do it. We began to share our worries, and I told him about my husband's illnesses, and he told me that maybe God put us on the path because we could help each other. The victim's husband is unwell. In fact, when I first spoke to her, he'd recently returned from hospital. Despite knowing this, the scammers were quite happy to continue with their scam. In our conversation, I told him that I felt uncomfortable chatting with him, as I was worried that my husband had the wrong idea about the messages, and we decided not to say anything until he felt better. This caused me to have many supposedly very personal conversations, and he told me that his wife cheated on him, and the day of the accident was the day he ran away with his lover, and that he did not say anything to his children since he did not want them to suffer. And that was the reason they had no contact with the wife's family. When the problem of Russia and Ukraine became known, he didn't want to be sent there, since he only had 6 months left to retire, and he asked me if I would request a permit from the Navy for his early retirement, as if it were an emergency. And that, of course, is a story we've heard many times on this channel. The scammer asking you to apply for their leave, or asking you to apply for their retirement. No organisation anywhere ever expects someone else to ask for leave or retirement on behalf of their employees. That's always something that the employee has to do themselves. The reason the scammers do this is because the fake grant of leave or the fake retirement papers will always be accompanied by a demand for money. I suggested that he tell his daughter to fill out the documents for him. He replied that because she was a minor, they did not allow it. I numerously refused not to do it, and finally, among so many pleas, I accepted. He sent me a link from the Navy to fill out the documents. Upon receiving the documents, I filled them in with all the information that I was asked for. They sent me a letter of permission granted, but that I had to pay $15,000. And here is that letter of approval. Let's just take a closer look at some of the things that it says. First of all, it's changed from approval for early retirement to approval for leave. Secondly, they can't spell commander. And I very much doubt if there's such a thing as Department of the Army. But remember that English is not my viewer's first language. Then, of course, came the inevitable demand for money. With this SF Recommendation Vacation Decree, you're hereby permitted to securely purchase your military returning notary stamp for absence of duty, which would cost you $10,000. I don't think the US Army charges its members to go on leave. My viewer later clarified that when she said $15,000 in that message to me, she meant $10,000. However, during the course of our conversations, she sent me several dozen receipts for payments that she'd made. It's very easy to get confused, and I quite understand why she did. In the next screenshot, she got confused again and typed $65,000, but as you'll see in the letter that's to come, what she actually meant was $68,000. My viewer continued her story. I told him that he couldn't do that, since my husband would find out, and he told me that as soon as he arrived, he would replace it, and that he would not even find out. I accepted after so many requests, and sent him the first $15,000. After a few weeks, I received the email. They signed the exit permit, but he needed $65,000 for all the requirements for his departure and early retirement. And here is that demand for such a large amount of money. Let's take a closer look at that as well. We really appreciate your contribution and effort towards a better America, it says. The Department of Defense wishes Commander Dennis Matthew a happy vocational trip to the United States under Defense Section B of Decree 202 on absence from duty with voluntary permission from service duty. You are urged to pay up our charges in order to submit this authorization document to Department of Defense. Charges $68,000. There are several clues in that document, but one of them is them saying you are urged to pay up. That's a very common phrase that scammers will use. And you'll notice that we're back to a leave request, not an early retirement request. Also, if English isn't your first language, and let's be honest, even if it is, it would be very easy to overlook the difference between a vocational trip and a vacational trip. It'd help us process your request faster and have Commander Dennis Matthew home in a couple of days if you can make payment within the next 48 hours. And if you look at the bottom right of the screen, you'll see that it included the name and bank details of a money mule. Look out for that if someone's asking you online for money. Are they actually giving you a proper business account? And if that isn't a demonstration of what I've often said, which is the more money you send a scammer, the more they will ask for, I don't know what is. I couldn't pay that money, continued my viewer. Plus, I refused and talked to them that if he had as much money in the USA as he says, they should give him permission and pay for it when he arrives. They refused, and that the only thing they could do was receive 75%. I couldn't do that, said my victim, and offered them $15,000 instead to see if they accepted it. When trying to deposit the money, it turned out that they changed that account and the money was lost, and it did not reach its destination. He told me that he would replace them and not to worry. That's when I told him that I wouldn't get another penny without telling my husband. However, the victim showed me receipts, and she did actually pay most of that money in instalments, including paying the £15,000 that they claimed was lost. Again, I can only presume that it was sent to a money mule who got caught. And that was when the victim's husband got involved. By then, the victim, as often happens, had been drawn into the scam. And so, as we've heard before, they started making up stories to tell the scammer to try to explain why they couldn't pay. My viewer continued her story. After they asked me for that huge amount of money, I decided to talk to my husband about it. Dennis Matthew tried to talk me out of it, and that, of course, is quite common, that the scammer will try to persuade the victim not to tell other people what's happening, so that other people can't tell them that they're talking to a scammer. Determined that I would not send him another penny, Dennis agreed. I talked to my husband. I explained to him how everything went, asking me that he wanted to talk to Dennis. Dennis texted my husband, saying he needed the money to please help him get back to his kids. He was very worried about his children. My husband asked for any proof or identification that it was really him. Dennis sent a photo of his passport with all his data. Everything was very real. And scammers will often send you photoshopped passports or driving licenses. That's one reason why, if somebody asks you to send them your personal documents online, you should never do it, because they can simply use them to try to scam other victims. It isn't hard to change, for example, the photograph or some of the data on the document. He asked Dennis questions that convinced him. He asked him to pay immediately when he returned. Dennis told him that he would pay him a good percentage. Dennis had a good amount in the bank and there would be no problem. And that's another thing to look out for when you're talking to someone online. If they offer to pay you back with a large amount of interest, then there's about a 99.9% chance that you are talking to a scammer. My husband asked for a letter from a lawyer committing to pay with interest, signed by the lawyer and by Dennis. So he did it, and the victim sent me the letter. It's very easy to find blank promissory notes online. The thing that struck me most about this one was the part where the alleged attorney had signed it and given his details. There's an address, but there's no details of the firm that he works for, and no details of his qualifications. Also, be aware that many countries don't call their lawyers attorneys. We don't in the UK. We refer to them as solicitors or barristers. Nobody in the UK would call themselves an attorney. And as far as I can tell, nobody in Cyprus calls themselves an attorney either. They call themselves lawyers. Look out for this if someone online sends you a document allegedly signed by an attorney. Do they actually have attorneys in the country where that document claims to come from? My husband asked him to please buy him some cigars. He wanted to try another type. Dennis told him that it would be a gift. We sent money. He would arrive in the USA in the same week on Friday. Friday arrived and we had no contact with him. On Friday night, I received a text that he was already in Cyprus. They had him waiting for his suitcase. He thought something was going on. He would get in touch as soon as he could. After a few hours, I received a text from the customs of Cyprus. They arrested him for the cigars that contained marijuana, and he had to go to trial. And here are those texts. The first one says, "Hello, I'm a customs officer at the Cyprus International Airport. We've just placed Mr. Dennis Matthew under arrest for carrying more than the amount of tobacco allowed, and also some traces of marijuana were found in his possession in form of cigars. They're from the Middle East. He claimed you were his emergency contact and we had to inform you. We'll keep you informed." And this was the second text. "My name is Christos Stavros. I'm the custom agent who has been assigned to Mr. Dennis. He has been processed and he's currently in lock-up, so you won't be able to talk to him. According to the agents, you have been briefed on why he has been placed under arrest." My viewer continued. "After 2 days, Dennis's lawyer gave me 10 minutes to text with Dennis. He told me that they all behaved very well with him when they found out that he was a commander of the Navy, that he only had to pay $180,000 as a fine, and they would let him go, or 6 months in jail, that he needed my help because he didn't trust anyone else, to talk to my husband and convince him he would pay every penny and more. Please don't abandon it. I was looking out for their children, and that they also needed money to help them and not leave them to their fate." My victim was sent this photo. Convenient that our man had someone there to take his photo as he was being arrested, and also that someone was able to send the photo to the victim. And I'll show you a bit more about that in a minute. At first glance, it looks fairly convincing. And she was sent another photo of a man sitting on a bed in jail. A quick reverse image search on that first photo gave this: someone being arrested in Turkey. The scammers had just changed the person's head. I haven't blurred the people in this photo because it's freely available online. Dennis, my victim continued, asked me please to send $1,000 to the children. I will buy you a gift card. That's how they started the gift cards to the children, while he fixed the legal matter. My husband and I didn't know what to do, since we would risk losing what we had already sent him. And without realizing it, my victim explained there why so many people send so much money to scammers. They start by sending smaller amounts with the promise that they'll get the money back, and then they're asked for larger amounts. By then, they've been drawn into the scam, and they feel that their only option is to keep sending the larger amounts, believing that that's the only way they have of getting back the money that they've sent. When I spoke to my viewer on video call, she explained that she sent the money in instalments using Bitcoin. She sent me this photo, a photo that the scammer had asked her to send to them. The first instalment she paid was $51,000. She withdrew the cash from the bank and then converted it into Bitcoin. So we decided to help him because we needed to deposit the money as fast as possible. As soon as we waited, we decided to speak directly to the consulate of Cyprus. There went another $100 for the long-distance call, plus the $1,000 that was sent to the children in gift cards, which he would also pay on his return. My viewer managed to contact the real consulate of Cyprus. The Cyprus consulate told us that they had no arrest reports that day and be careful with scammers. I decided to contact the Navy for help. They told us that they did not have anyone with that information in their records. That's how our doubts began. "Well, we investigated," said my viewer, "and after we had already sent him thousands of dollars, we decided to make a report with the police of my state, FBI, Interpol, and EFCC of Cyprus. I decided to continue talking with Dennis until I had something concrete and told him to talk to the Navy. He got so mad because he could lose his retirement because of the marijuana content, and it would be dishonest for a commander in the Navy. I told him that I was just trying to help him and to understand my frustration at being able to lose everything." The victim decided to try and keep the scammer on the hook while they started reporting what was happening to the FBI and other legal bodies. The victim said, "Without feeling that I made a mistake, but at the same time I couldn't believe that he was a scammer. I talked to my husband and told him that I would play with him until I found someone to help me, since having contact would make it easier to locate him. So that's how I did it. Dennis tells me that he felt bad about my husband since I was helping him, that he had fallen in love with me. Knowing my husband, I followed the game. I only asked my husband not to read the messages because for me it would be disrespectful to him. I sent him songs and all kinds of things that are sent to a lover. I needed to get what was inside, she said, so I decided to pose as my husband's deceased brother. The victim's brother-in-law sadly passed away a few years ago. The scammer, of course, was unaware of that. So I told him my husband was in the hospital and his family wouldn't let me see him because they blamed me since I lost money trying to help him. I told him that my husband's brother mistreated me and hit me a lot. He took my car keys and he wouldn't let me out. He had my husband's cell phone. At this point, both the victim and her husband started sending messages to the scammer from her husband's cell phone, pretending that the phone was in the hands of her brother-in-law. My husband began to send them not very nice, and when I wanted to vent, I told him things pretending to be my husband's brother. OMG, she said, it felt good to get what was inside me, even though, after doing it, I told him that I was very sorry for the insults of my brother-in-law. LOL, she said. He asked me for more money, and by this point the victim had stopped sending money. He asked me for more money. I told him that I got $35,000 as soon as I could deposit it, so I had 2 days waiting for the money and while I was investigating about it. The day I told him that he could sneak out, he would have the money in an hour. I asked my victim to clarify what she meant there, and she said she was referring to a day pass, which would have allowed Dennis to get out of jail for a day. When he did not receive a response from me, he insisted, since many hours had passed. At the end of the day, I told him that my brother-in-law took the money from me and that now it was his. Me trying to protect the money for Dennis. My brother-in-law broke my arm. Dennis got angry, she said. He would put my brother-in-law in jail and nobody would hurt me, that soon he would be with me to protect me. The next day he sent a letter to my brother-in-law. This, said my viewer, is the letter to my deceased brother-in-law. Hello, Jimmy. Do you know the victim's husband's name is the reason why I'm in jail? He actually asked me to get him some cigarettes. I didn't know there were drugs inside of it. That's how I was arrested. I actually don't want to involve the victim's husband in this situation, so I actually told my attorney here that they should forget about the victim's husband because I know he's not in good health condition. I know I owe him a lot of money, and I've signed a document of paying him back every single thing I'm owing him with interest. In case you don't know, the victim is a good friend of my late wife, and she knows me very well. That's why she chose to help me out. The $32,000 you took from her is to get me out of here, so I would be there and settle everything out. But you and the victim's husband found it, and to believe me when I'm still owing the victim's husband a lot. How do you want me to pay back when I'm still locked up here? And notice what the scammer is doing there, a cross between bullying and emotional blackmail. And for your information, you're not talking to a child. I'm 62 years old now. My attorney is recording every single thing you're texting me. Human abuse. Think of this situation if you're a real man, Jimmy. By now, as my victim has already said, she'd contacted the EFCC in Nigeria. This is how the EFCC describe themselves on Twitter. They say they are Nigeria's leading anti-graft agency, charged with the responsibility of investigation and enforcement of all economic and financial crimes laws in Nigeria. They'd asked her to send all the conversation that she'd had with the scammer, and initially, she tells me, she didn't get a response from them. Then she and her husband did some research of their own and found themselves a lawyer in Nigeria. Then, said my viewer, I received an email from the EFCC of Nigeria. They caught 92 scammers and had the ones posing as Dennis and his lawyer. After a few days, Dennis contacted me. Remember, Dennis didn't know that my viewer had reported him to the EFCC. After a few days, Dennis contacted my viewer saying that he had many problems and that's why he changed his email, but that he was there for me. He missed me and needed to know about me and his children. By then, My viewer had decided that she should try and keep the scammer on the hook if possible, while the EFCC did their investigations. I started to tell him to trust me, she said, and to talk about what was happening to him. I knew who he was. Dennis said what I was referring to. I told him that I received information about him. I didn't care what he did. If he wanted, he could mend his ways. I would be with him at all times. I loved him with all my soul. All lies, of course, my viewer added. He told me not to pay attention to what I was hearing. It was all a lie. I tried to get more information from him to see what he would answer me. He swore that he would get me out of here so that my brother-in-law, who my viewer was pretending to be, would not hurt me any more, that he would take me to live in his country. I answered, "You're not from the USA, as you told me," and, caught out, as the scammers often are, he replied, "I wanted to say my state. Tell me the truth," I replied. Meanwhile, my viewer continued, and as I've already told you, I investigated. I found a good lawyer in Nigeria who's helping me preparing my case for the court. They're going to make 8 very serious charges. I kept talking with Dennis as much as I could. I even told him that if he wasn't from the USA, I would help him start a new life. It was there that he told me that he would tell me the whole truth, but that he had to be careful of what he told me. And you'll see in a minute that Dennis then resorted to what I often refer to as the Plan B sob story. Caught out, the scammers will then resort to telling you how much they really do love you and just trying to make you feel sorry for them and thinking of another way of begging you for money. Little by little, said my viewer, he opened up, but it left me with many doubts. He no longer told me his stories that he did before, until one day I sent him photos of the real commander that I found on YouTube. I took a copy and placed them as if he'd spoken on a video camera, and he believed it. Good for me, added my viewer. She told me this part of the story when we spoke on video. There, she added, he confessed, and I'd put that in quotes, that he'd been trying to tell the truth for some time, but it was difficult for him. But as you'll find out in a minute, as with all scammers, he has no idea what the truth means. Caught out, the scammer, posing as Dennis, then resorted to what the scammers often do, love bombing or fake confessions of how guilty they feel. Everything you've heard about me is true, he said, and I'm truly sorry I've hurt you. I feel terrible for what I've done, but I'm doing my best to pay you back everything. Yes, well, I think we all know that that's not true. And then this. I'm not lying to you any more, he said. You know me already. What's the need for lying? Can you get $100, please, honey? And how many times have we heard every single word of that on this channel before? That was followed by honey. Me loving you was never a lie. You keep that back of your mind. I fell for you too, just the way you did. We had this bond. I wanted to tell you everything, but I'm just sorry I have no better excuse. I don't think that even needs a comment from me. My viewer kept all the receipts for all the money that she sent. Here are some of the screenshots that she sent me. Obviously, I've removed any identifiable or personal details. There was this withdrawal, $20,000 from Chase Bank. This for $5,000, also from Chase Bank. There were several receipts for Bitcoin deposits. This one for $4,000, this one for $11,000, this one for $1,000, and this screenshot from a Bitcoin machine for a deposit of $21,000. There was this photo that the victim took after withdrawing $51,000 from Chase. She took that photo because, of course, the scammer instructed her to take it to prove that she'd done it, something that scammers will almost always ask you for. Send the receipt, send a photo. And 2 more withdrawals from Chase, this one for $12,000 and this one for $3,000. The victim sent me several more photos of receipts that she has as well. Altogether, My viewer estimates that she sent an amount in excess of £200,000 to the scammer. The majority was sent to get him out of jail in Cyprus, but there was also the payments for the leave and payments in gift cards to the children. Overall, my victim estimates that this has cost her nearer to $300,000, because some of the money came from redeeming policies that she had that had early redemption penalties, plus, of course, there's the interest on repayments for the loans that she took. I'd like to thank my viewer for telling this story, not only on my channel, but on several others. She's keen to help raise awareness, to help prevent other people from falling victim in the same way that she did. And finally, as ever, if you felt this video was useful, please like it. Please share it with anyone that you feel should hear this story. Please comment down below. And remember, this channel is about raising awareness. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you again in another video.